Good morning. You are now watching the Sunday Politics Show on BBC One. Your usual host, Andrew Neil, has not returned from his Easter holiday just as yet. But because politics never sleeps, I, Basil, along with my colleague Shweta Nandi, who is running the television crew, are here to talk to you this holiday about the works of politics in the UK. I'll be starting you off today with some knowledge regarding the UK Parliament, and following up with details on the roles of frontbenchers and backbenchers, the House of Commons, and the position of whips in their respective parties. Parliament. The government has about 100 ministers who are each responsible for different areas of our lives, like transports, education, even food and sport. The government makes decisions on our behalf, but it cannot do anything else it chooses to do. Parliament, however, can, as it is the bigger entity that involves the government. Parliament is the highest authority in the UK. Traditionally, Parliament is sovereign. This means that the British system of government recognizes only the authority of the Parliament as a functional legislative body. Given that there is no institution apart from the Parliament itself which can set aside a law. Some may argue that parliamentary sovereignty has been undermined by the European Union since the EU law is superior to the British law. But this is a matter that requires further discussion. Carrying on with the topic, as well as making and changing laws, Parliament has to keep an eye on and influence the government. This is called scrutiny. Coming to you live from the Parliament at Westminster, London, we have a number of members of Parliament that will report to us the role of Parliament when making laws and scrutinizing the government.
Parliament sits on a sessional basis, and each session there is a Queen's speech, and that Queen's speech sets out the government's main legislative programme.
The first thing that normally happens is there might have been a draft bill published that everybody can have a look at, even before it comes into the chamber to be debated.
Once they appear on the order paper, that clerk will read out the title of the bill. It's the formal first reading of a bill. And that sort of starts the whole process off.
The next thing that happens is a debate in Parliament, and it's called a second reading debate. And what that really means is, in principle, what do we think this bill's all about?
Members from both sides will indicate what they like about it and what they don't like about it. At the end of that process, it will then go to a committee.
I have much more positive view of Clause 6, which
basically it's just like a project team of MPs from across all the different parties. They go away and they literally go through the bill line by line. So it's a bit like editing a book. Then it comes back to Parliament and the Chamber looks at this revised bill and then have that final debate. At that stage, the Commons has really had its say. It goes over to the House of Lords. They do pretty much the same process. They then throw it back to the Commons. We debate that all over again. And then generally, we reach a conclusion about what it should end up looking like.
The way you introduce legislation as a backbencher is there's a presentation bill that you can ask for. There is a 10-minute rule bill that you can, again, request. Or enter the ballot.
I always look at the Chamber and think, the Chamber's the great place of the House. This is, to me, what belongs to the backbenchers.
The vast majority of members of Parliament are not ministers, and the responsibility of members of Parliament, apart from handling casework for their constituents, is to come to the Chamber and to probe, question, scrutinise, challenge.
However, will the Minister confirm that the Health and Social Care Act creates more quangos than the Public Bodies Act abolished.
One of the real main functions of Parliament is to scrutinise government. Members will do that through questions, both written and oral, so it's not just the questions on the floor of the House.
Often MPs have their own one-to-one meetings with ministers if they've got a particular local interest. MPs are on select committees and they hold inquiries. And then, of course, there's the Backbench Business Committee.
Since this Parliament started, the government has given backbenchers 35 days of the parliamentary calendar to schedule for themselves the debates that they want to raise. So that's been a really exciting development, and that's kind of really changed the way that Parliament is working.
Of course, there'll be emergency items that can be brought to the House at times. There could be an emergency statement, big issues that really affect the country, quite rightly. Parliament's got to reflect not something next week, but something that's immediate, and that's the power of the Chamber.
The government pursues the work that it is doing, not just to look at the possibility of a British Bill of Rights, but also so that in future we will be in a position to deport people who are dangerous to us.
Thank you, fellow MPs. That was a wonderful insight. Now, moving on. Parliament is made up of three things: the monarch, the House of Lords, and the House of Commons. The House of Commons contains all of the 646 members of Parliament, also known as MPs. These are the people we vote for at general elections. Each MP represents a different part of the country. An MP's political area is called a constituency. Both the House of Commons and the House of Lords spend around half the time making and passing new laws. MPs can also bring up subjects for debate so that everyone gets their opinions heard. As there are lots of opinions, sometimes everyone shouts at the same time. Roles of frontbenchers and backbenchers. The most recent general election in May 2010 produced a hung parliament. This means that none of the parties running had the majority vote from the House of Commons. After 5 days of negotiations, the Conservative Party, run by Prime Minister David Cameron, and Liberal Democrats, run by Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, agreed to form a coalition government. Running against the two-party government is Her Majesty's Royal Opposition. That is the Labour Party, run by MP Ed Miliband. When these parties come together at the House of Commons chambers to engage in a debate, the government and opposition face each other across the floor of the House. There are frontbenchers and backbenchers on each side of the House. Each party consists of members that are allocated to the front benches and those to the back benches. Frontbenchers are MPs who have been given state jobs, such as the leaders and the members of the cabinet. For example, amongst the Conservative frontbenchers, you would find Prime Minister David Cameron, Shadow Secretary of State for Children, Schools and Families Michael Gove, and Shadow Secretary of State for Business, Enterprise and Regulatory Reform Alan Duncan. Amongst Liberal Democrat frontbenchers, you would find Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, Secretary of State for Business, Innovation and Skills Vincent Cable, and Minister of State for Schools and for the Cabinet Office David Laws. Amongst Labour Party frontbenchers, you would find Leader of the Opposition Ed Miliband, Deputy Leader of the Opposition Harriet Harriman, and Shadow Secretary of State for the Home Department Yvette Cooper. In the chamber, the role of government frontbenchers is to introduce bills or propose laws. The role of opposition frontbenchers includes speaking about opposition policies and questioning government policies. Unlike frontbenchers, backbenchers are MPs who are members of the official governing or opposing parties, but they are not members of government. For example, amongst the Conservative backbenchers, there is the 1922 Committee, with the MP Graham Brady as the chairman, MP Charles Walker as the vice chairman, and MP Brian Binley as the committee treasurer. Amongst the Liberal Democrat backbenchers, a few important MPs are MP Jenny Willett, who is in charge of the Department of Work and Pensions, MP Don Foster, who is in charge of the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, and MP Dan Rogerson, who is in charge of the Department of Education, Families and Young People. Amongst Labour Party backbenchers lies the chair of all parties, Parliamentary Human Rights Group, MP Anne Clyde, and the Police and Crime Commissioner of Britain, MP Tony Lloyd. In the chamber, backbenchers will draw attention to electorate or state territory issues. When not in the chambers, backbenchers have several roles, including working to provide help and services to their community and participating in parliamentary committees. House of Commons. For further details on the conduct of frontbenchers and backbenchers in the House of Commons chambers, I now have a fellow UK Parliament reporter, followed by a number of MPs that shall report to us live from Westminster to speak to us about the House of Commons.
Welcome to the House of Commons chamber, the place where our elected representatives, or members of Parliament, come to discuss bills or issues that concern themselves or their constituents and to question the government. Now, this is the 20th century part of the building after it was rebuilt following the destruction of the original chamber in the Second World War. Now, when the chamber was rebuilt, Commonwealth countries contributed to the cost of the materials to rebuild the place. For example, the doors into the chamber are from India and Pakistan, the table of the House from Canada, the bar of the House from Jamaica, and the Speaker's chair from Australia. Now, the Speaker sits right behind me in the middle of the room, and their job is to keep order during debates and to call MPs to speak. To his or her right-hand side on those benches, that is where Her Majesty's government sit, and behind them, the MPs belonging to the government party. To the Speaker's left-hand side, that is where the official opposition sits, and beyond them is where the other opposition parties sit, just underneath the gangway. Further along is a single chair which is used by the Sergeant-at-Arms, the parliamentary official who is responsible for the security in the House of Commons. The dispatch boxes on the table are where the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition stand, or whichever Minister or Shadow Minister are speaking at the time. And at the end of the table, at the top and the bottom, are the holders for the mace. Now, the mace is a symbol of royal authority, without which the House of Commons cannot sit and debate. Now, the mace is brought in and out of the House by the Sergeant-at-Arms in a procession at the beginning and the end of each day. Now, if you'd like to come and see the proceedings here in the House of Commons, the public gallery is just above us and anyone can turn up and ask to be admitted. However, depending on what's being debated in the chamber on that particular day, you might have to wait a while. If you're a UK citizen, you can apply for a ticket through your local MP. To find out what legislation and other topics are due to be discussed, then you can go to the Parliament website at www.parliament.uk. Now, right at the back, above the Speaker's chair, is the press gallery, where accredited journalists and reporters from Parliament's official report sit. Now, the official report is called Hansard, after the 18th century printer who produced the House of Commons Journal, and it's a record of what was said inside this chamber. Now, the report is produced daily and bound into volumes. It can also be read and searched for on the Parliament website only a few hours after proceedings have taken place. Now, people say that this chamber is a lot smaller in real life than it looks on TV. Well, that's because when it was rebuilt after 1945, it was deliberately kept to be the same size so to preserve that air of intimacy. In fact, there's room here for about 430 of the 650 members of Parliament, which means on particularly busy parliamentary days, it gets very crowded in here and the atmosphere is electric.
My role as Speaker, as is true of my work in the chamber more widely when chairing debates, is not to take sides, not to be on one side or the other, not in other words to be a player, but to serve as the referee of the match.
Everybody wants to get the attention of the Speaker, or whoever's in the chair, whether it's the Deputy or whether it's the Speaker themselves. And people, to get noticed, stand up.
It's very much for the chair to choose who to call. Members will stand up each time someone sits down.
And I'm looking around to see who's standing up, and I then have to decide who to call. How do I decide? Well, I go back and forth from one side to the other, so there's a mix between government and opposition. I'm looking to call members of Parliament from different intakes, not just from people who came in 40 years ago, but from people who came in 2 years ago. I'm looking to get a geographical spread, and to some extent I'm looking to call people expressing a range of different views.
The Speaker and the people in the chair are referred to as Mr. Speaker or Madam Deputy Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker. There's very little use of individual surnames. That's because only the Speaker will call a member by name. Other members will refer to people on their benches as my honourable friend or the honourable member for a constituency.
Does my right honourable friend suppose?
And for members opposite, normally as the honourable lady or gentleman, or again, my constituency.
Division, clear the lobby.
Votes in Parliament are often referred to as divisions. At the end of a debate, typically the Speaker will say, the question is as on the order paper. As many as are that opinion say aye, and people will yell aye. Of the contrary, no, and very often members will yell no. And at that point, the Speaker in the chair says, division, clear the lobbies.
Voting's really exciting, and first of all you have the division bell ringing, and you have that all around the parliamentary estate. So wherever you are in Parliament, you hear the division bell going, and you have 8 minutes to when the doors are shut. So the doorkeepers who keep the doors open, after the 8 minutes have finished, shout, lock the doors, and then if you haven't made it, you've missed the vote.
We divide, and you're either in support of whatever the issue happens to be, so you go into the aye lobby, or you're against, so you go into the no lobby, and that's how we divide. And we physically divide, by the way, i.e. we walk through the division lobbies and have our names noted off a big list of paper of all the MPs. At first, when I came to Parliament, I thought, this is a cumbersome and clunky way of doing things. But actually now, after being here for 2 years, I find it an incredibly useful way for being able to get hold of a minister, because if I have a particular issue that I would like to raise with that minister that my constituents are concerned about, as a backbencher, it's one of the useful, less formal tools.
Thank you to everyone at Westminster that managed to come work this holiday and bring us some very useful information about the House of Commons. Moving on, we now have the topic of the function of whips. Role of whips. Whips are MPs or lords appointed by each party in Parliament to help organize their party's contribution to parliamentary business. One of their responsibilities is making sure the maximum number of their party members vote, and vote the way their party wants. A few important whips in the UK Parliament are Deputy Chief Whip of the Conservatives, MP John Randall, Deputy Chief Whip of the Liberal Democrats, Lord Wallace, and Chief Whip of the Labour Party, MP Alan Campbell. The job of the whips becomes more important if the majority of the party in government is small. This makes it easy for the government to lose in major votes. Therefore, it's crucial that the members on both sides, government and opposition, try to get as many members to vote as possible. Every week, whips send out circulars called the whips to their MPs or lords detailing upcoming parliamentary business. Special attention is paid to divisions where members vote on debates, which are ranked in order of importance by the number of times they are underlined. Important divisions are underlined 3 times, a 3-line whip, and normally apply to major events like the second readings of significant bills. Defying a 3-line whip is very serious and has occasionally resulted in the whip being withdrawn from an MP or lord. This means that the member is effectively expelled from their party, but keeps their seat, and must sit as an independent until the whip is restored. And that's all we have for today on the Sunday Politics Show. Thank you for staying tuned this Easter holiday, and also a big thank you to our sponsors at the UK Parliament Organisation for allowing us direct access into their videography. Basil Ali, BBC One. Happy Easter.